Jared, Jared Whittaker is out of the UK. All right. Jared is out of the UK. And Jared has decided to dedicate to us a portion of his Sunday afternoon, right? Just to talk to us. All right. And I'm not going to take away from the reality of who Jared is. I'm going to allow Jared to tell us a little bit about himself and how he got to this space. So, Jared, welcome. Good to have you, buddy.
Yeah, thanks, Rolando. I'm glad to be here. Happy to give some of my Sunday afternoon to you.
Yes, man. Listen, buddy, man. I'm telling you, I'm so excited to have you. Guys, Jared and I met. We were on a platform together. We were both talking about the work that we do. And when I listened to Jared's story, I said, hey, you know what? I'd like to have this guy on the podcast. So Jared is decided that I'm ready to go, Rolando. Let me at it, right? So, Jared, tell us a little bit about yourself. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, brilliant. So, yes, I live in the UK, as you mentioned. I'm actually not from the UK originally. I'm from South Africa, is where I was born and raised. But I do live in the UK now and have for the last good amount of years. Um, yes, I've always been someone who worked in the corporate world. I was working for banks, financial institutions, and actually worked my way up and ended my corporate career as CEO of a global software firm. But something in me wasn't quite happy with what I was doing. It wasn't fulfilling. It was about making money, not about making change. And a big part of my life is I was a victim of domestic abuse for a very long time at the hands of a woman. And something in me said, you know what? When you were stuck in all the problems you had, there was no one to help you. There was no resources you could find. You had to do it on your own. Don't let other guys do that. So I actually stopped what I was doing as a CEO. I left that world and I now dedicate my life to raising awareness for men about things like this. So I primarily am an author. So I've written 7 books on the topic now. And I do that, but I also host workshops, do coaching, teach guys about the stuff they need to, and try and be a resource for them to realize they don't have to go through it on their own. And as well as that, I host a YouTube channel called Strong Men with Jared Whittaker. It just plays on the fact that I actually do strongman as a hobby in my personal life. So, the big Atlas stones, pulling airplanes, pulling cars, that kind of good fun stuff. Um,
Mhm.
and I think if guys can see that someone like me, who is not what you would consider someone who looks like a typical victim, I'm a big guy. I'm 6'2". I weigh like close to 130 kilograms. I do strongman. I'm not what you would think is going to get pushed around easily, but yet for 10 years I was abused, including physical abuse. So I think if they can see that, well, look, it happened to him, it's okay that it happened to me. Maybe if I'm not even that big, it doesn't matter because there's no such thing as a typical victim.
Wow, wow. Jared, Jared, I want to say something to you here because when you talk about domestic violence, okay, right now in Canada, Jared, in Canada, just this week, actually, there was a huge demonstration in Canada because a lot of women here in Canada, they're really worried about the huge uproar of domestic abuse. And most of those cases are men are the aggressors. All right. And here you are as a man, and you're saying, Rolando, there are cases where men are actually victims of domestic violence. And looking at it from a psychological, societal perspective, how do we even go into a community like this where, and let me give you an example of the stats and why it's where it's at. There was in 3 months, 6 women were brutally killed, right? The youngest was 22 years of age. And so a lot of them were murder suicides.
Yep.
Here you are as a guy, right? You do the work. I myself that I'm like you, Jared, because I seek to advocate a lot for male victims of domestic violence. All right. And that's why I said, hey, I need to talk to Jared because maybe there's a way for us to bring more of this to the surface. But how do we work in communities like these? How do we go to even some of these persons to say, hey,
Well,
it's
I think
not.
the big way we do it is we don't go in and say we want to take away from what you're getting for women. We don't want that at all. Domestic abuse against women is terrible, right? And if people are doing this to women, it needs to be stopped.
Mm-hmm,
So
mm-hmm,
we're not
mm-hmm,
we're not saying take away funding from women's charities and give it to men's charities. Absolutely not. Give
mm-hmm,
more funding to women's charities, but give the same funding to men's charities and support organizations because it is a non-gendered issue. Men get abused, women get abused, and people who abuse people are terrible people. Doesn't matter if you're a man, woman, whatever. And the way statistics are gathered, and I mean, I can talk specifically for the UK, but I imagine it's a global issue, is there's massive underreporting from a male abuse side. Men do not want to, it's something like only 28% of male victims report abuse. So many men don't even know they're being abused because it's not physical, it's emotional, mental, psychological, etc. And what you have in the UK, for example, is the stats that get reported for violence against women and girls. It's actually been proven and shown that they're incorporating male victims into those to inflate the figures, making it look like more women are getting abused when actually a percentage of those are men. So I think the thing is to go into it, and there's people who advocate for domestic abuse against women, and then there's what I call radical feminists. And you're never going to argue properly with a radical feminist because they don't want to. But for reasonable people, they will see, okay, these people are not trying to take away from getting help for um, men, or they don't want to take away from women. They just want to get help for men as well, and raise that awareness. So I think if we go in with a thing of saying let's be equal, let's be fair, obviously feminists will argue with that because they don't want equality. But when I say feminists, radical feminists, but a normal, reasonable person would, think, well, I've got brothers, father, sons. I don't want this happening to them. So
mm-hmm,
yeah, I think it's
mm-hmm.
about just positioning that we're not trying to take anything away.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And thank you for saying that, Jared, because sometimes I'm sensing that persons may feel that, hey, this is misogyny. They are ignoring the reality, right? Women don't abuse men. I don't know where these guys get this idea from, right? And culturally too, Jared.
Yeah,
There's a based on my own research, there's a huge depth of cultural chaos, if you want to call it that, that's happening, right? Where men are just not a good fit to be victims,
yeah.
right? How do we get past some of those?
So yeah, it's a massive it's an entire societal change needed. I mean, my last book that released last month actually is called Misandry: The War on Men Uncovered, and it's not about a war on men. It's about how men are seen and treated in societal. This man up stigma, the fact that men must just suck it up and move on with it, not talk about their problems, the fact that it's not manly to be abused, so you keep quiet about it, and it just needs to be normalized that like I said, I'm a very big guy. When I went into the police station the first time to report abuse, the police laughed at me. They literally laughed at me and told me to get out. And they took one look at me and thought, "There's no way this guy's getting abused." But that's because they're ignorant in their understanding of how abuse works. They think it's about size. It's not. It's about power, and they don't understand all the tools and techniques abusers use to get that control over you. And it's about educating people about all these things that are happening, police, courts, etc. How does abuse actually work? But then educating society that there's no shame in something like this happening. If I went into work and said, I was in a bank robbery yesterday and they had guns and it was terrible and it was traumatic, no one would bat an eyelid. They would be like, oh my God, that's terrible. Are you okay? But men are too scared to go in. Oh, I was attacked by my wife last night. She pulled a knife on me and tried to stab me. That's shameful for some reason, but it's not. and we need to break that stigma that there should be no shame in that.
Thank you, Dar. And Jared, if you look and see if you can get into the pod bean, that would be great. If not, not an issue, right? But Darren, I've heard some really, how do I say it now? I heard some really challenging stories, Jared, from men, right? I've heard stories from men who, they say, "Hey, Rolando, I'm at home. My partner just hit me in the face. All right. You could see the blood, you could see the damage. The cops were called, right? And here in Canada, this happens frequently. The cops were called, all right? And when the cops were called, the cops show up and there's the guy, he's bleeding, right? He's in chaos. He walks into the room. The cops walks into the room. They look at him. They look at her. They say, "Okay, you come with us." They put him in cuffs. They take him off. He's locked up. And he said, "Rolando, I didn't lift a finger. I did nothing to her." Right? There's also the relationship between men and when they do connect with probation officers, right? And it's almost as if probation officers are trained to once the guy comes into the room and he is said to have a domestic violence case, he's automatically treated like a less of a human being. All right. And then there's a relationship in the judicial system where a man who stands up in court, Jared, and he is said to be an aggressor for anything domestic violence related, then hey, he's getting the hammer, right? The judge has no compassion. The lawyers have no compassion. Maybe only person on this guy's side is if he has an attorney that's sort of there to try and navigate or lessen the sentence. So those three things alone, Jared, almost makes it close to impossible for a guy who is not an aggressor to have any hope. What have you seen? How do we help these guys?
Yes, I mean your story there of um, someone get the police coming out, seeing that the guy's beaten up and bloody, whatever. That's exactly what happened to me, and I was arrested um, for exactly the same thing. They came out, they arrested me because she told them I attacked her, but meanwhile she had attacked me. They took me to the police station. They kept me there the whole day. They interviewed me. I had bruises, cuts, everything, and they could see this. And they kept saying that she doesn't have a mark on her, but they still were trying to push it on me the whole time. So again, I think it's because I mean, here, particularly in the UK, there's very much this focus on violence against women and girls. Women are victims, men are perpetrators. So there's that societal shift that needs to change. The education that happens for support staff here, like police, courts, etc., the model that they used to be trained on, that's the model. Women are victims, men are perpetrators. The model is all very gendered. It says if a man is abusing so and so, it's a massive change that's needed. Go onto Google and type in, things like "my wife is shouting at me," and it'll say things like reasons your wife might be shouting at you. She might be frustrated, blah blah. And give you like all these things. It's like my husband is shouting at me. It's like call the police. It could be domestic abuse, whatever. And that it's this view in life that if a man does something, he must be abusive, but if a woman does something, oh, it's there's a reason why, kind of thing. So it's such a big change that's required. It's not a simple thing.
Wow. And we're hearing just a little echo there, Jared. I'm not sure. So just wanted to let you know that. But guys, did you hear what Jared said? So I shared a real story and he said, Rolando, I can relate to that. All right. And that is just one of the sad realities that we are dealing with right now professionally. When we look at it, it's almost as if there is a, how do I say it, a refusal to acknowledge that men are not always the perpetrators. Research shows it, right? But then listen to what Jared said too, that there is this space where they sort of beef up reports because men are not reporting stuff. So they sort of, how do I say, beef up the statistics and put it out there. Here we go again. But it seems like a lot of men are suffering in silence, right? Jared, you said that you were the CEO of a software company and you shifted your focus because of personal health challenges, right? And here you are today, you're an author, you're a public speaker, you do YouTubing, what's your big why? Why that shift? What?
Um, I think, like I said earlier, when I was going through everything, there was nothing. I had no support. I looked, and there was no organizations that I knew of that I could reach out to for help, and it was very much a woman-focused thing. If you typed in domestic abuse into the internet, and I remember I actually rang a helpline, and they asked me questions in a way, wanting to show that I was the perpetrator, not that I was a victim. So I got no help from them. So um, it was very hard for me to get out, to escape, to move on with my life. And I just thought I don't want other guys going through that because I was literally about 2 days away from suicide. I had planned it, I had written notes and everything, and I was going to wait for the weekend to do it. Um, and then luckily, I got arrested because of the false allegation, and that kind of saved my life. And I thought, you know what, there's guys out there that are going through this, and since I've started doing what I do, I've had calls from guys who are literally like, I'm sitting, I'm about to kill myself. What, there's no other way out of this kind of thing, and I just didn't want other guys to go through what I did.
Wow. Wow. So, and guys, listen to what Jared is saying here, and I just want to allow that to sit in for a little bit. Right? Here's a man, and this is why I'm passionate about men's mental health and creating a safe space. Here's a man who said, "Hey, Rolando, I was right there on the brink." In Canada alone, last year or the year before, there were 4,000 suicides. 75% of that reported were men. Okay. And here's a guy who says, Rolanda, I was there. I planned everything, I was waiting for the weekend. And what I'm hearing Jared saying is there was nothing for me. I didn't know who to turn to. I didn't know where to go. I didn't feel heard. And so he got to that place where he thought, let's get over with it and done then. So Jared, how did you get out of that? Because, and why I want to ask you this, Jared, is so many men have decided, hey, that's it. But you changed your mind. What happened?
I got arrested, which was probably the best thing that's ever happened to me because the way my mind worked at the time was it was just constant. Like every day was torture, every day was hell, and every day I wake up and just think like I don't want this anymore. And I was scared because I was scared to try and get away because she would constantly threaten me with things like I'm going to call the police and tell them it was you. They'll believe me because you're a man. And because of the environment I worked in the kind of companies I worked for in the corporate world, being arrested and having a criminal record, I would have immediately lost my job. And not to mention like the embarrassment and the stigma and all of that kind of stuff. But when I got arrested and they put me in the cell, it was weird because first of all, I felt safe. I thought, well, she can't get in here, so I'm safe while I'm in here. Um, but then also, I kind of felt, well, I've been arrested. It's not the end of the world. It's not as bad as I thought it would be, and the impact wasn't as massive. So actually, I can kind of just get on with it. Um, yeah, it kind of shifted my mind to realize, well, actually, you were scared of being arrested. It happened. It's not so bad. You get past this and you move. And look, it's not easy to get past. It's years and years and years of, all the kind of things to get past it. But I realized then that there was a life after for me, and I could fight for it, and that's what I've been doing.
Wow. Wow. Jared, what did you say to, what would you say to a guy now, 'cause we have listeners. We may have a guy out there right now who's listening to your story. He may be on the brink of considering, taking his life. All right. What would you say to him right now in the moment?
Don't. It's obviously, I can't lie and tell people, oh, it's fine, you'll walk away and it'll be easy and it's like a walk in the park after that. It's not. It's hard and it's tough, and there's good days, there's bad days, there's times you want to give up and there's times you want to push through. But in the end, it's worth it. And particularly, if you've got kids, things like that, fight for them. Don't let them be the memory of you. Be what your abuser wants them to think of you. So just if nothing else, just go on out of spite against your
Mm,
abuser, but fight.
yeah, yeah. When you'd made that shift, Darren, you know, um, what was it like for you? Because you said it was hard. All right. And men, Jared, what I've learned working with men now, being in this space for over 15 years, I realize that men are so much more resistant to getting help. Men are so much more resistant to, and here you are, you okay, you got arrested, but what was your journey like? What were some of the things that you had to confront as you shifted your focus? Here you are today, you're an advocate for it, but tell us a little bit about that process. Tell
Yep.
us what.
Look, it's a long process, and it's not a straight line either. It's an up and down. Like I said, some days good, some days bad. And whenever you get out of an abusive relationship, there's there's getting away from it and being geographically removed, and then there's getting out of it because they still have those hooks into you mentally and emotionally. So if you're in a situation where there's no kids involved, no courts involved, or things like that, just go no contact and don't have any um, contact at all. But obviously, if you have contact with your abuser, they will try and hook you back in or pull you back into it. So for me, it was very difficult because there were children involved. Um, so it was very kind of, I was away, but not away. She was still abusing me mentally, emotionally, psychological, just not physically, because I wasn't in the house, but there was still contact the whole time. And it was only when I started months and months later realizing that this was happening and started to pull away from that it started really getting much better. And then when I realized, okay, look, I have to do a whole bunch of things here. One, I need to actually live my life for myself, not for her, which had been the whole, a relationship. Um, I have to try to figure out who it is I want to be, not who she wanted me to be. I have to get some help, so therapy, counseling, things like that, to deal with all the things I've been through. And yeah, I have to be happy with myself. So for me, I started hectically back at the gym and I started training hard. I got a counselor who I related well to and started counseling. And I just try to focus on, to me, the most important thing is hearing with my own voice again. Because when you're in an abusive relationship, you hear with your abuser's voice. You hear what they want you to hear. Even if you're thinking to yourself, you'll think like, oh, I'm going to buy myself a new car, for example. And then you'll hear them saying, you don't deserve it, you're not worth it, or whatever. So you won't. So I had to learn to speak with my own voice to myself, which was a hard, long process. And there's still days to this day, years and years later, that I catch myself thinking that's not my voice and have to pull it back. So it's just about looking after yourself mentally, physically, realizing who you want to be and not who you were when you were being abused, because you're a very different person. and learning as much as possible about what it is that was done to you by an abuser. So learning about the tools and techniques they use, like gaslighting, isolation, triangulation, things like that, and understanding, okay, they did this to me, which made me do it, this. And what I find, it's a two-step thing. Step one is you need to get to the point where you can forgive yourself for what you think you did wrong that got you abused. And when you get past that point, you get to step two, which is when you realize you don't have anything to forgive yourself for. And that's a very hard place to get to, and it's a long, long time to get there, but it's a great place to get to. When you can stand there unashamed and say, "Yeah, of course this happened to me. I'm not ashamed of it. Why would I be? Someone did this to me. I didn't, it's not my fault someone abused me. It's their fault that they're a terrible person." So, and I think a lot of guys are still in step one, where they're thinking they mustn't say anything about it. They still have to figure it out or whatever. But it's quite fantastic when you get to step two.
Wow, wow. Thank you. Jared, there's also the flip side to that, as I'm listening to your story, because there are men who, because of the experience that they had in an abusive relationship, they have themselves become abusers, right? They're insecure, they're afraid to be in committed relationship, they don't trust, right? They become like, they become playboys, quote unquote, right? They don't have any committed relationship because hey, I loved once, I was betrayed, I was abused. So now all women are going to feel the wrath of, right? What did you say to those guys? How do we, you know?
I'll be harsh and say grow up. Like, if someone does something bad to you, it doesn't mean that everyone. It's like saying if a white person robs you, all white people are bad.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? It's
Yeah,
not all women are bad, and in
right.
fact, not all men are bad, and not
Mm-hmm.
all women are bad. Bad people are bad. So
Mm-hmm.
you were unlucky that you had this bad thing. What you need to do is obviously don't rush off and 1 week later be in a new committed relationship. Don't do that either.
Right.
Learn, learn what these people do so that you can spot it up front.
Mm-hmm.
If it starts happening again, you can remove yourself early from the relationship if you can spot
Mm-hmm.
the signs.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's hard to trust, and obviously there's going to be things left over. When you
Mm-hmm.
do get into another relationship, be completely open and honest with the person you're in the relationship with about what's happened.
Mm-hmm.
If they're a decent person and someone you want to be in a long-term relationship with, they'll understand and be able to work on it with you. But yeah, don't say you hate what happened to you and then do it to someone else, because that's just
Yeah,
that's ludicrous.
yeah. Thank you, Jared. Because the piece that we're passionate about, is creating holistic, healthy masculinity, right? Men who are understanding the reality of, hey, when I get into that space, I acknowledge it, I take the lead, I do the work. And guys, that's what Jared is saying. It's not going to be a straight path, but he took the initiative and he dove in, right? He put himself in there and he did the work. And notice, guys, what he said, hey, it's not easy work. So you've got to be willing, guys, and I'm saying this to you, you've got to be willing to invest in doing the work to heal, right? And here's a powerful thing. I want to reiterate what Jai just said, which is, hey, you know what? You have got to get to that place where you're able to find yourself a therapist. Okay, guys, hint, hint, find someone that you connect with, right? No shame, no harm, no foul. Work through your stuff, but also create a healthy routine for yourself where you're taking care of yourself and where you are saying, hey, wait a minute here, is that the voice of my abuser that's talking? Or is that's a huge shift. So thank you so much, Jared, for pointing that out, shifting that, and also forgiving yourself. That's powerful. Forgive yourself, but then when you recognize that, wait a minute, There's nothing to me for me to forgive myself for.
Yeah.
Wow,
Yeah,
that's loaded.
it's a big thing, and you know a lot of guys. I mean, this is quite prevalent. I mean, when I started writing my first book on this, which is my story, I spoke to a bunch of the guys in the gym, and the gym I go to is very much a, you know, it's not a fancy health club. It's like a factory with weights, and it's only bodybuilders, powerlifters, strongmen. You know, it's very like a people who are serious and want to train. They go there. And, you know, a lot of the guys there are huge guys. And when I started talking to some of them openly about it, they started coming to me. Oh, this happened to me as well. And, you know, yeah, it happened. This is my story. And they started opening up to me and saying it had happened to them. And these are, again, men you wouldn't think are typical victims because they're big, muscly guys. But it happens to everyone. And I think if you can take that initiative and you can talk to other men about it, you'll see that it's not, there's no shame and you're not, you know, the odd one out, that this has happened to you and you must be embarrassed about it. It's quite prevalent.
Hmm. Wow. So I'm speaking to all the men now who are listening. Guys, domestic violence does not discriminate. All right. Doesn't matter your size, your weight, your age. It doesn't matter, whether you are a guy who is 6'2" or 5'4". It doesn't matter if you're white or if you are black. It doesn't matter if you're South African or Jamaican or Canadian. It doesn't matter, right? Domestic violence affects all sexes, all class, all ethnicity, right? Whether you are affluent or not, it is possible that you can be a victim. But society has made it look like, hey, if you're a man, you can never be a victim. You're always a perpetrator,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. And the problem is, the more less like a victim you look, the more likely it is that you'll be looked at as the perpetrator. I mean, trust me, when I walk into court, I can see they immediately look at me and are like, "Yeah, it must be him. There's no way."
Yeah, yeah,
But there very much is.
yeah. And the stereotyping is so big, right?
Yeah.
Stereotyping is so big. And that's the piece. And guys, Daryl, I wanted to just um shift gears here a little bit and ask you, this question, even some of our listeners who are listening live or pre-recorded, what advice would you give, as it relates to encouragement, counsel? What did you say to some of the men who are listening to this podcast right now?
Yeah, I mean, the number one thing I tell everyone who I coach or do workshops with is learn. Learn as much as you can, because you'd be surprised how when you're learning about these things, and you know, maybe you're learning about what is gaslighting and just learning about how it's used as a tool when someone's abusing you, your brain will start to recognize, actually, I remember a time when she or he said this to me, and I remember a time when this was done, and I got confused and thought maybe I was at fault. And you can start unpacking your entire relationship. And because what happens in an abuse relationship, you blame yourself for a lot of things, and they get you to blame yourself for a lot of things by mentally confusing you. You can start to immediately realize, hang on, that wasn't me, that wasn't me. And you can start unpacking what happened. And it becomes a lot easier then for you to understand, okay, I don't have to feel guilty because I actually didn't do that. It was them. And, you know, the more you learn, the more you start to understand it better and realize this was something that was done to you. It wasn't something you allowed to happen. It was done to you. So learning really kind of kicks that along in a big way. And I mean, for me, I learned a lot about all of this stuff. And then still, when I wrote my first book, I still had even further like understandings and epiphanies because I was reliving the whole thing. So to me, just learn about all the things that happen, but also learn about potential support and potential help, how you can maybe help other guys as well. Because I think in helping other people, it really helps you heal as well.
Wow. Jared, thank you, man. This has been such a powerful conversation, man. I feel like we need to invite Jared to come back and have more of these conversations because this is what it's all about, guys. And you'll hear me repeat this every single day on the podcast, which is, guys, mental health is not a myth. All right. And as men, we have to seek to create more safe spaces to talk about some of these issues. And one of the big issue is domestic violence. All right. And domestic violence as it relates to male victims. All right. And how do we support each other? Jared said it. Let's talk about it. Let's normalize it, right? And for the men who are out there who stop judging the brother if he comes and talks to you, right? If you're in a healthy relationship, good for you. All right. And I want to say I'm round of applause for you. But if you're not in a healthy relationship, you know what is scary? What's scary is this is if you're not in a healthy relationship and you don't know it. All right. That's what's scary
Yep.
to be in an unhealthy relationship, but because society and your perception and your outlook does not allow you to admit that your relationship is unhealthy, that's what's scary, right? And sometimes we're in those relationships and the gaslighting and stuff has become so frequent, it's almost as if you are afraid to say or use your voice because as soon as you do, the person that you're with targets you and makes you feel like, hey, that was bad. You shouldn't do that. You should, and so you start second guessing or questioning whether or not should I, shouldn't I? And sometimes as men, we suffer in silence and we create an instability for our mental health.
Yep.
Jared, listen, man, before you go, can you just say how can some of my listeners connect with you? How can they reach you? You know?
Yeah, brilliant. I mean, I've got a website which is literally just jaredwhittaker.com, and
Mhm.
everything is on there. Links to my books that I've written on the subject, links to my upcoming events, my YouTube channel, courses that I've written. So I've written multiple courses. If guys don't want to talk to people yet, but they want to learn about the stuff in their own space and time, there's courses on there you can do. So everything's linked from my website. Yeah, just my name, jaredwhittaker.com.
Perfect. Jared, we were so glad that you came here today, guy. You know, it was wonderful just to hearing speaking to somebody who is actually okay to share their story on a platform like this. Jared, we appreciate you, man.
No,
Thank you
no,
for
very,
being here,
very
man.
welcome. Thanks, Rolanda. It's
All
great.
right, and we do look forward to connecting with you in the future. Who knows, man? Maybe, time will last. You may do some collabs. Who knows, right?
Yeah, yeah, brilliant.
But definitely, thank you for being here. And in the meantime, guys, I just want to remind you this, that if you need to hear more, please don't forget subscribe to our podcast, xyspark.podbean.com. We'll have the full episode posted on our website in another week or so. You can also find Jared at jaredwhitaker.com if you want to connect with him. If you need any resources, connections, life coaching, that's what he's into. That's what we do. In the meantime, don't forget this, that at XY Spark, we believe that there is a spark in you. And we will see you again next time for another wonderful conversation that seeks to empower men to become the best version of themselves. We'll see you again next time.